And this is where the deeper meaning of gladness begins to reveal itself. Most people think gladness is a reaction. Something happens, and then we feel good, we receive good news, achieve a goal, meet the right person, or experience a moment of success. Gladness appears afterward as a reward. But when we look carefully at both ancient traditions and emerging discoveries in human biology, a different picture starts to emerge. Gladness may not be the result of a meaningful life. It may be one of the causes. This subtle shift changes everything. I want to invite you to consider a possibility. What if the emotional state we carry is not merely describing our reality? What if it is actively participating in the creation of that reality? When we wake up each morning, our nervous system immediately begins scanning the world. It evaluates threats, opportunities, relationships, memories, and expectations. Long before we consciously choose our first thought, the body is already creating a model of what it believes the day will become. And that model influences our behavior. A person expecting disappointment notices evidence of disappointment. A person expecting conflict notices tension. A person expecting failure becomes highly sensitive to obstacles. This is not because the world changes. It is because attention changes. The brain constantly filters billions of pieces of information. Only a tiny fraction reaches conscious awareness. The emotional state we maintain helps determine which information passes through that filter. In other words, emotion is not simply a feeling. Emotion is a lens, and gladness may be one of the most powerful lenses available to us. When we experience genuine gladness, not forced positivity, not denial, but authentic appreciation, something remarkable happens inside the body. Stress chemistry begins to soften, muscles release unnecessary tension, breathing becomes more efficient. Heart rhythms often become more ordered and coherent. The body begins shifting from protection toward participation. This distinction matters. Many people spend years trying to create a better future while unconsciously remaining in survival mode. Their goals may be ambitious, but their biology is still preparing for danger. Their thoughts say expansion, but their nervous system says protection. The two signals conflict, and whenever there is conflict between conscious intention and biological conditioning, biology usually wins. This is why gladness is so important. Gladness sends a message of safety, not perfect safety, not the absence of challenge, but the recognition that life contains possibilities greater than fear. The body responds accordingly. The mind responds accordingly. Even our perception of time begins to change. Think about moments when you felt deeply grateful, deeply inspired, or deeply connected. Time often felt different. Decisions became clearer. Creativity increased, solutions appeared more naturally. Many people describe these experiences as flow states. What interests me is that these states are not always created through effort. Sometimes they emerge through emotional alignment. The more coherent our internal state becomes, the less energy is wasted on inner resistance. Imagine driving a car while pressing the accelerator and the brake at the same time. The vehicle moves inefficiently. Components wear down. Progress becomes difficult. Many human beings are doing exactly this emotionally. Part of them wants growth. Part of them expects disappointment. Part of them desires abundance. Part of them rehearses lack. Part of them seeks connection. Part of them fears vulnerability. These opposing signals consume tremendous energy. Gladness helps resolve that conflict. It reminds the system what harmony feels like. And harmony is not weakness. In biological terms, harmony often represents efficiency. When the body operates efficiently, resources become available for healing, creativity, learning, and adaptation. This is why emotional states matter so profoundly. For generations, emotions were often dismissed as secondary experiences. They were considered less important than thoughts or actions. Today, however, a growing body of research suggests emotions influence nearly every major system of the body. Hormonal activity changes, immune responses change, cardiovascular patterns change, decision-making processes change. The body listens continuously to the emotional environment we create within ourselves. And this brings us back to the idea of being surrounded by gladness. Perhaps being surrounded by gladness has less to do with changing external circumstances and more to do with establishing a stable internal atmosphere. An atmosphere becomes the environment in which everything else grows. A gardener understands this principle immediately. Healthy growth depends on conditions. The seed matters, the intention matters, but the environment determines whether potential becomes reality. Human consciousness appears to function in a similar way. The beliefs we carry are seeds. Our goals are seeds. Our dreams are seeds. But the emotional climate surrounding those seeds influences how they develop. Fear creates one kind of environment. Resentment creates another. Hopelessness creates another. Gladness creates something entirely different. It creates openness. And openness is powerful because life itself is constantly changing. When we become rigid, we resist opportunities that arrive in unexpected forms. When we become open, we begin recognizing possibilities that were always present but previously invisible. This does not mean every desire appears instantly. It means we become increasingly aligned with conditions that support meaningful transformation. I have found that many people misunderstand manifestation because they focus exclusively on outcomes. They become attached to specific results while overlooking the internal qualities that make those results possible. But if consciousness is participating in reality more deeply than we once believed, then our emotional state is not a side note in the process. It is part of the process itself. Gladness becomes more than a pleasant feeling. It becomes information. It becomes communication. It becomes a signal transmitted throughout the body and reflected through our choices, our relationships, our creativity, and our perception of what is possible. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that this signal does not require extraordinary circumstances to begin. It can emerge from the smallest moments. A breath taken with awareness, a memory that awakens appreciation, a simple recognition that life is still offering possibilities. Because the moment gladness becomes more than an occasional reaction and starts becoming an environment we intentionally cultivate, something subtle begins to shift beneath the surface of our experience. And that shift opens the door to a level of conscious participation that most people never realize they have access to. And the reason most people never recognize this deeper level of participation is because they have been taught to look for change only in the external world. We are conditioned to measure progress through visible results. More money, better opportunities, improved relationships, greater success. These things certainly matter, but they represent the final stages of a process that often begins long before any outward evidence appears. Nature demonstrates this principle everywhere. A tree does not become visible the moment a seed is planted. For a period of time, all meaningful activity happens beneath the surface. Roots develop before branches. Stability develops before expansion. Human transformation follows a similar pattern. Before a new reality becomes visible, there is often an invisible reorganization occurring within consciousness itself. New emotional patterns begin forming. Old assumptions begin dissolving. The nervous system starts responding differently to situations that once triggered fear or resistance. At first, these changes may seem insignificant, but they are not insignificant. They are foundational. Many people abandon their growth during this stage because they are searching for external proof. They assume nothing is happening because they cannot yet see measurable results. Yet some of the most important transformations occur in silence. Think about how water changes temperature. As heat is applied, the water appears unchanged for a long time. The temperature rises gradually, molecules move differently, energy accumulates. Then suddenly a visible transition occurs. The water begins to boil. From the outside, it appears as though the change happened instantly. In reality, the visible transformation was preceded by an invisible process. The same can be true within us. Every moment of genuine appreciation, every moment of authentic gladness, every moment of emotional coherence. These experiences may be contributing to changes we cannot yet see. What appears invisible today may become obvious tomorrow. This understanding invites patience, not passive waiting, active trust. There is an important difference Passive waiting says, I hope something changes. Active trust says, I recognize that change is already unfolding, even if I cannot yet measure it. This perspective creates a very different relationship with life. Instead of constantly asking, why isn't it happening? We begin asking, how can I align more deeply with the qualities I wish to experience? Notice how empowering that question becomes, because it places attention on what we can influence right now. We may not control every event. We may not control every outcome, but we can influence the atmosphere we bring into each moment. And atmosphere matters more than many people realize. Imagine walking into two different rooms. In one room, tension is everywhere. Nobody has spoken, yet you immediately sense discomfort. In the other room, there is warmth, openness, and ease. Again, nobody has said anything, but you feel it instantly. The environment communicates before words appear. Human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to emotional fields. We constantly influence one another through subtle signals. Our posture, our breathing, our facial expressions, our tone of voice. Even the rhythms of our physiology affect the people around us. This means gladness is not merely a private experience, it becomes part of the environment we help create. When a person consistently cultivates genuine appreciation, others often feel it. Not because the person is pretending, not because they are forcing optimism, but because coherence naturally radiates outward. The body becomes less divided. The mind becomes less fragmented. Energy previously consumed by internal conflict becomes available for connection. This is one reason why some individuals seem to elevate every environment they enter. They are not necessarily more intelligent. They are not necessarily more successful. Yet people feel better around them. Their presence communicates possibility. Their emotional state creates space for others to access their own potential. What if this quality is not a mysterious gift possessed by a few rare individuals? What if it is a skill? What if it can be developed intentionally? Modern neuroscience suggests the brain remains adaptable throughout life. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. Emotional habits become reinforced through experience. Patterns of perception can change. This means gladness can be practiced. At first, this idea may seem unusual. After all, most people think emotions simply happen to us. But consider learning a musical instrument. The first attempts feel awkward. Movements require conscious effort. With practice, however, new patterns become natural. Emotional conditioning often works in a similar way. The brain becomes efficient at whatever it repeats. If worry is repeated, worry becomes familiar. If resentment is repeated, resentment becomes familiar. If appreciation is repeated, appreciation becomes familiar. The nervous system learns the emotional environments it inhabits most frequently. Over time, those environments begin feeling normal. This realization carries enormous implications because it means our emotional future is not entirely determined by our emotional past. Many people unconsciously assume they must continue feeling what they have always felt. They identify with old experiences, old disappointments, old wounds, old expectations. These experiences may have shaped them, but they do not necessarily define them. Human beings possess a remarkable capacity for renewal, not because the past disappears, but because awareness creates new possibilities. The moment we become conscious of a pattern, we gain the ability to relate to it differently. And this is where gladness reveals another layer of its power. Gladness interrupts unconscious momentum. It breaks cycles of automatic thinking. It reminds us that reality contains more possibilities than our fears suggest. This does not require denying difficulties. In fact, authentic gladness often emerges alongside challenges. Some of the most inspiring people I have encountered are not individuals who avoided hardship. They are individuals who discovered something deeper than hardship. They learned how to remain connected to meaning even during uncertainty. They learned how to recognize beauty even during transition. They learned how to access gratitude even while facing unanswered questions. That ability changes everything, because when gladness is no longer dependent upon perfect circumstances, it becomes a source of stability. And stability creates a foundation for conscious creation. Instead of reacting to every external event, we begin responding from an inner center that remains available regardless of conditions. The world may continue changing. Unexpected challenges may still arise. Uncertainty may still exist. Yet beneath those changing circumstances, a different relationship with life begins to emerge. A relationship rooted not in fear, but in participation. Not in resistance, but in alignment. Not in scarcity, but in possibility. And as this inner atmosphere becomes stronger, we start noticing something remarkable about the connection between consciousness, emotion, and experience, something that suggests the original manifestation code may have been pointing toward a principle far more profound than simply attracting what we want. Because what begins to emerge is the understanding that manifestation is not primarily about acquiring something that is missing. It is about becoming increasingly coherent with qualities that already exist as possibilities within us. This distinction changes the entire conversation. When manifestation is reduced to obtaining external outcomes, people often become trapped in cycles of expectation and disappointment. They focus intensely on results while overlooking the inner conditions that shape how those results unfold. But when we explore consciousness more deeply, a different perspective appears. The quality of our experience is influenced not only by what happens around us, but by the state from which we meet what happens. Two people can encounter the same circumstance and experience it completely differently. One person sees limitation. The other sees opportunity. One person notices obstacles. The other notices lessons. One person feels defeated. The other feels challenged to grow. The external event may be identical. The internal interpretation is not. This observation reveals something important about human consciousness. We are not passive observers of reality. We are active participants in how reality is experienced. Our beliefs, expectations, emotions, and assumptions continuously interact with the world we encounter. The meaning we assign to events influences the choices we make. The choices we make influence future experiences. Those experiences reinforce new beliefs, and the cycle continues. Many people spend years attempting to change their lives while remaining trapped within the same emotional framework. They change jobs. They move to different cities. They pursue new relationships. They chase new goals. Yet the same patterns keep returning. Why? Because external circumstances may have changed while the internal atmosphere remained the same. The environment around them transformed. The environment within them did not. This is why gladness is more than a pleasant emotional state. It is a transformational state. Gladness begins altering the atmosphere through which experience is filtered. When we genuinely appreciate life, even in small ways, perception starts expanding. Possibilities become visible that previously went unnoticed. Creative solutions emerge more naturally. Connections become easier to recognize, and energy becomes available for growth rather than constant defense. What fascinates me is that this process appears to be reflected throughout biology. The human body is not a collection of isolated systems operating independently. Everything communicates. The nervous system communicates with the immune system. The endocrine system communicates with the brain. The heart communicates with the nervous system. Every moment, countless signals move throughout the body. These signals help determine whether the body prepares for protection or growth. Protection is necessary at times. It helps us survive challenges, but remaining trapped in protection for extended periods can become exhausting. When the body continually anticipates danger, resources are diverted toward defense. Energy that could support creativity, healing, and adaptation becomes consumed by vigilance. Gladness introduces a different message. It signals possibility. It signals openness. It signals that life contains more than threat. And when this message is repeated consistently, the body begins responding differently. The mind begins responding differently. Even relationships begin responding differently. This is because emotional states are rarely contained within a single individual. They influence interactions. Think about the people who have had the greatest positive impact on your life. Often, their influence extended beyond what they said. You felt something in their presence. Perhaps you felt understood. Perhaps you felt inspired. Perhaps you felt seen. Their emotional state created an environment where something valuable became possible. Now imagine extending that principle into everyday life. Imagine carrying a sense of gladness into conversations, into work, into challenges, into uncertainty. Not because everything is perfect, but because you recognize that your inner atmosphere contributes to every experience you create. This does not mean pretending difficulties do not exist. Authentic gladness is not denial. It is awareness. It acknowledges challenges while refusing to become defined by them. There is tremendous strength in that approach because reality is always changing. Situations improve. Situations decline. Unexpected opportunities appear. Unexpected losses occur. If our emotional stability depends entirely on external conditions, then our inner world becomes as unpredictable as the circumstances around us. But when gladness emerges from a deeper source, something remarkable happens. We begin carrying our center with us. Instead of searching for reasons to feel whole, we begin expressing wholeness through how we engage with life. That shift may sound subtle, but its implications are enormous. Most people are taught to seek fulfillment. Far fewer are taught to cultivate the qualities that generate fulfillment. Yet every meaningful experience contains both an external and internal component. A beautiful sunset exists externally. The ability to appreciate it exists internally. A loving relationship exists externally. The capacity to receive and express connection exists internally. An opportunity may appear externally. The willingness to recognize and act upon it exists internally. External conditions matter. Internal conditions determine how fully we experience them. This realization helps explain why some individuals continue finding meaning even during periods of uncertainty. They have learned to develop an inner foundation that is not entirely dependent upon circumstances. Gladness becomes part of that foundation, not temporary excitement, not fleeting pleasure, a deeper form of appreciation for being alive and participating in the unfolding experience of life. And perhaps this is where the original manifestation code begins revealing its most profound insight. The goal was never simply to attract outcomes. The goal was to become the kind of person capable of meeting life from a state of coherence, because coherence changes everything. It changes perception. It changes decision-making. It changes relationships. It changes the energy we bring into every situation. And over time, those changes influence the direction of our lives. The process is not magical in the way many people imagine. It is more intimate than that, more personal, more immediate. Every thought influences emotion. Every emotion influences biology. Every biological state influences perception. Every perception influences choice. Every choice contributes to experience. The cycle continues moment by moment, day by day, year by year. And the more conscious we become of that cycle, the more intentionally we can participate in it. This is where gladness transforms from an emotion into a practice, a way of meeting life, a way of directing attention, a way of communicating with our own biology, a way of creating conditions that support growth rather than resistance. And when this practice becomes consistent, we begin noticing subtle changes that cannot always be measured immediately, but can certainly be felt. Changes in how we respond to uncertainty, changes in how we relate to ourselves, and changes in how we recognize the hidden opportunities that have been waiting just beyond the limits of our previous perception. And those hidden opportunities often reveal themselves in ways that are far more subtle than most people expect. We tend to imagine transformation as a dramatic event, a breakthrough, a sudden revelation, a single moment that changes everything. While those moments certainly occur, much of human growth happens differently. It unfolds through small shifts in perception that gradually alter the direction of our lives. A new understanding appears. A limiting belief loses its influence. A A situation that once triggered anxiety begins producing curiosity instead. An old habit starts feeling unnecessary. At first, these changes may seem insignificant, yet over time they accumulate. And accumulation is one of the most powerful forces in human development. Consider how a river shapes stone. The water appears gentle. The changes seem slow. But year after year, the landscape transforms. Consciousness often works in a similar way. The emotional states we repeatedly cultivate become forces that shape the terrain of our inner world. This is why gladness deserves far more attention than it typically receives. Many people treat it as an occasional reward, something to enjoy when circumstances happen to cooperate. But what if gladness is actually a foundational ingredient in how we engage with reality? What if it serves as a stabilizing force that helps organize our thoughts, emotions, and actions into greater alignment? When we begin asking these questions, an interesting pattern emerges. The moments when we feel most connected to life are rarely the moments when we possess everything we want. Instead, they are often the moments when we are fully present, a meaningful conversation, a quiet walk, a creative breakthrough, a moment of genuine connection, a realization that changes how we see ourselves. In these experiences, something important occurs. Attention returns to the present moment, and the present moment is where all possibility exists. Fear often pulls us into imagined futures. Regret often pulls us into remembered pasts. Gladness has a unique ability to anchor awareness in the now, not because it ignores the future or forgets the past, but because it reminds us that our power to respond exists only here, right now. This realization may be one of the most practical insights available to us. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy attempting to control things that have not happened. They rehearse problems repeatedly. They anticipate disappointment. They imagine failure before action has even begun. The body responds to these imagined scenarios as though they are real. Stress increases, tension increases, mental clarity decreases. Over time, this pattern becomes familiar. What began as occasional worry can evolve into a habitual state of being. Yet the opposite process is also possible. We can train attention toward appreciation, toward possibility, toward meaningful engagement with the present moment. This does not eliminate uncertainty. It changes our relationship with uncertainty. Instead of viewing the unknown as a threat, we begin viewing it as a field of potential. That shift is extraordinarily important because uncertainty contains both challenge and opportunity. Which aspect we perceive first often depends upon the emotional lens through which we are looking. Gladness broadens that lens. Researchers studying positive emotional states have repeatedly observed something fascinating. When people experience genuine appreciation, curiosity, or joy, their awareness tends to expand. They become more flexible in their thinking, more creative in their problem solving, more open to new information. In other words, gladness does not simply make us feel better. It often helps us function better. Our capacity to learn increases. Our ability to adapt improves. Our willingness to explore new possibilities grows. This creates a powerful feedback loop. The more open we become, the more opportunities we notice. The more opportunities we notice, the more reasons we discover to remain engaged with life. And the cycle begins reinforcing itself. This may help explain why some people seem unusually resilient. Resilience is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to remain connected to possibility despite difficulty. Every human life contains challenges. Every human life contains uncertainty. No one is exempt from change. The question is not whether challenges will appear. The question is how we meet them when they do. If our inner environment is dominated by fear, every obstacle appears larger. If our inner environment is strengthened by gladness, perspective changes. The obstacle may remain, but our relationship to it evolves. We become less reactive, more thoughtful, more creative, more capable of discovering solutions. This is where the connection between consciousness and experience becomes especially interesting The external world influences us. Yet we are also influencing the external world through the quality of our responses. Every interaction creates consequences. Every choice creates momentum. Every emotional pattern contributes to future outcomes. In this sense, manifestation is occurring constantly, not only through what we think, not only through what we desire, but through the ongoing relationship between consciousness, emotion, behavior, and perception. Life becomes a dynamic exchange, a conversation rather than a command, a partnership rather than a demand. And when we begin understanding manifestation this way, the emphasis naturally shifts. Instead of obsessing over outcomes, we become curious about alignment. Instead of asking, how do I force reality to change, we begin asking, what qualities am I bringing into this moment? That question opens an entirely new path, because qualities such as gratitude, appreciation, compassion, curiosity, and gladness are available now. They do not require permission from external circumstances. They can be practiced immediately, cultivated intentionally, strengthened through repetition, and every time they are strengthened, they influence the atmosphere in which future experiences emerge. This is why the original manifestation code may have been less about acquiring something outside ourselves and more about remembering something within ourselves. A capacity that has always existed, a natural ability to participate consciously in the unfolding of life, not through control, not through force, but through coherence, through emotional alignment, through the deliberate cultivation of states that support growth, connection, creativity, and resilience. The more we embody those qualities, the more our experience begins reflecting them back to us in unexpected ways. New insights appear. New relationships emerge. New opportunities reveal themselves, not because reality suddenly changed overnight, but because our awareness expanded enough to recognize what had been hidden before. And as that awareness continues expanding, another profound realization begins to surface, one that challenges the common belief that manifestation is primarily about changing the world around us, and suggests instead that the deepest transformation may occur when the boundaries between who we are, what we feel, and what we perceive start becoming far less separate than we once imagined. Because once we begin examining that relationship more carefully, a remarkable possibility emerges. The separation we often assume exists between our inner world and our outer experience may not be as absolute as it appears. Most people grow up believing that thoughts happen in one place, emotions happen in another, and reality exists completely outside of both. Yet our everyday experience suggests something more complex. The way we feel influences what we notice. What we notice influences what we believe. What we believe influences how we act. How we act influences the results we create. Those results then reinforce our emotional patterns. The cycle is continuous. So continuous, in fact, that we often fail to see it happening. Instead, we focus only on the visible outcomes while overlooking the invisible processes that helped create them. This is why awareness is such an important part of personal transformation. Awareness allows us to observe the cycle while it is occurring. The moment we become conscious of a pattern, we gain the ability to work with it rather than being unconsciously controlled by it. Imagine standing beside a river. If you are floating in the current without realizing it, the river determines your direction. But the moment you step onto the shore and observe the flow, new possibilities become available. You can choose where to enter. You can choose how to navigate. You can choose whether the current is taking you where you truly wish to go. Many emotional habits operate in exactly this way. People often inherit assumptions from childhood, culture, environment, and experience. These assumptions become so familiar that they feel like objective reality. A person may assume success requires constant struggle. Another may assume relationships inevitably lead to disappointment. Someone else may assume happiness is temporary and fragile. Over time, these beliefs become filters, and filters shape perception. The individual is not intentionally creating limitation. They are simply viewing life through patterns that have become familiar. What fascinates me is that the body often reinforces these patterns automatically. When a belief is repeated for years, it becomes associated with specific emotional states. Those emotional states trigger predictable biological responses. The biology then strengthens the emotional experience. The emotional experience strengthens the belief. A self-reinforcing loop develops. This is one reason genuine change can feel difficult at first. We are not merely changing thoughts. We are changing patterns that may have been repeated thousands of times. The nervous system prefers familiarity, even when familiarity is uncomfortable. This explains why some people remain attached to habits they consciously wish to release. The pattern feels known, and what feels known often feels safe. Yet growth requires something different. Growth requires expanding beyond familiar emotional territory. It requires teaching the mind and body that new possibilities are safe enough to explore. This is where gladness becomes surprisingly powerful. Gladness creates a bridge between familiarity and possibility. It introduces change without triggering excessive resistance. Think about the difference between forcing yourself toward a goal through fear and moving toward that same goal through inspiration. The external action may appear similar. Internally, however, the experience is completely different. Fear contracts awareness. Inspiration expands it. Fear narrows options. Inspiration reveals them. Fear asks, what if I fail? Gladness quietly asks, what if something wonderful is possible? Notice the difference. One question pulls attention toward danger. The other opens attention toward opportunity. Neither guarantees a particular outcome, but each creates a different psychological environment. An environment influences behavior. Behavior influences experience. This understanding helps explain why emotional states deserve far more respect than they often receive. They are not secondary to life. They are woven into life itself. Every decision carries an emotional component. Every relationship carries an emotional component. Every meaningful pursuit carries an emotional component. The state from which we engage life matters, perhaps more than we realize. This does not mean we should attempt to feel glad all the time. That would be unrealistic. Human beings experience a full spectrum of emotions for good reason. Sadness has wisdom. Anger has information. Fear can offer valuable signals. Every emotion serves a purpose. The goal is not emotional perfection. The goal is emotional awareness. When we become aware, we stop being controlled by automatic reactions. We gain the freedom to choose how we respond. And that freedom changes everything, because conscious response is one of the greatest expressions of human potential. It allows us to interrupt inherited patterns. It allows us to create new habits. It allows us to participate actively in our own development. Gladness supports this process because it encourages openness rather than reactivity. When we are open, learning becomes easier. Adaptation becomes easier. Connection becomes easier. We begin recognizing possibilities that would otherwise remain invisible. Think about how many opportunities are missed simply because someone assumes they are impossible. How many relationships never begin because fear speaks louder than curiosity? How many creative ideas remain unrealized because doubt appears before action? How many transformations remain dormant because a person never imagines a different future is available? Gladness challenges those assumptions, not through force, through expansion. It gently widens the boundaries of what we believe is possible. And once possibility expands, behavior often follows. A new conversation is initiated. A new skill is learned. A new opportunity is pursued. A new chapter begins. Looking back, these actions may appear small, yet small actions often create profound consequences over time. The course of an entire life can shift because of a single decision. And that decision may originate from a subtle change in emotional perspective. This is why cultivating gladness is not merely about feeling good. It is about maintaining access to possibility. Possibility is the birthplace of transformation. Without possibility, growth stalls. With possibility, new futures become imaginable. And once a future becomes imaginable, it becomes something we can move toward. Step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment. What makes this especially intriguing is that the process appears to operate regardless of whether we consciously recognize it. Human beings are constantly shaping their experience through patterns of attention, belief, emotion, and action. The question is not whether we are participating. The question is whether we are participating consciously. And as we begin participating more consciously, another layer of the original manifestation code starts revealing itself, a layer suggesting that the emotional atmosphere we cultivate may do more than influence our perception of reality. It may determine the degree to which we can access the deeper creative capacities that have been present within us all along. And those deeper creative capacities may be among the most underestimated aspects of human potential. When people hear the word creativity, they often think of art, music, writing, or invention. While creativity certainly includes those expressions, its reach extends much further. Creativity is present every time we solve a problem. Every time we adapt to change, every time we discover a new way of understanding ourselves, every time we choose a response that differs from an old habit. In this sense, creativity is not a talent reserved for a few individuals. It is a fundamental characteristic of conscious life. We are constantly creating, not always creating physical objects, but creating interpretations, meanings, decisions, relationships, and possibilities. The quality of this creative process is influenced by the state from which it emerges. A mind dominated by fear tends to recycle familiar outcomes. A mind grounded in openness tends to explore new pathways. This is one reason gladness can have such a profound impact on personal growth. Gladness encourages exploration. It creates psychological space. It loosens the grip of rigid expectations and allows fresh perspectives to emerge. Think about moments when you have experienced genuine inspiration. Perhaps a solution suddenly appeared after days of frustration. Perhaps an idea arrived unexpectedly during a walk, a conversation, or a quiet moment of reflection. Perhaps clarity emerged precisely when you stopped forcing it. These experiences reveal something important. Insight often arrives when resistance decreases. The harder we try to control every variable, the narrower our awareness can become. The more open and receptive we become, the easier it is to notice possibilities that were already present. This does not mean effort is unnecessary. Effort matters. Discipline matters. Action matters. But there is a difference between effort that emerges from fear and effort that emerges from alignment. Fear-driven effort often feels exhausting because it is accompanied by internal conflict. Aligned effort feels different. There is still commitment. There is still focus. There is still persistence. Yet beneath those qualities exists a sense of flow, a sense that our energy is moving in the same direction rather than being divided against itself. This brings us to an idea that appears repeatedly throughout both ancient wisdom traditions and modern studies of human performance. The greatest transformations often occur when thought, emotion, and action begin working together. Most people have experienced moments when these elements were out of sync. They thought one thing but felt another. They desired one outcome but acted in ways that supported a different result. They imagined success while expecting failure. They sought connection while anticipating rejection. This internal division creates friction. Friction consumes energy. The more friction exists, the more difficult progress becomes. Gladness helps reduce that friction. It helps bring different parts of ourselves into greater harmony. And harmony has extraordinary consequences. When thought, emotion, and behavior become aligned, clarity increases. Decision-making becomes simpler. Energy becomes more available. Life begins feeling less like a struggle against ourselves and more like a collaboration with our deeper intentions. This is not because challenges disappear. It is because our relationship with challenges changes. Instead of viewing obstacles as proof that something is wrong, we begin seeing them as information. Every obstacle contains feedback. Every setback contains insight. Every unexpected turn contains the potential for learning. Gladness allows us to remain open enough to receive that information. Without openness, frustration often blocks growth. With openness, even difficulties can become sources of wisdom. I find this especially interesting because many people assume manifestation is about controlling external circumstances. Yet the deeper process may involve something entirely different. It may involve becoming the kind of person who can recognize opportunity within circumstances. The opportunity may already exist. The question is whether we can perceive it. Perception is shaped by attention. Attention is shaped by emotion. And emotion is influenced by the atmosphere we cultivate within ourselves. This creates a fascinating chain of influence. A small shift in emotional state can alter perception. Altered perception can change decisions. Different decisions can create new experiences. Those experiences can transform the direction of an entire life. When viewed from this perspective, gladness is far from trivial. It becomes a practical tool for expanding awareness, a method for maintaining access to possibility, a way of keeping consciousness flexible enough to adapt and grow. Many of the limitations people experience are not physical limitations. They are limitations of expectation. The individual assumes a certain outcome is impossible and therefore never explores it. The assumption becomes invisible. The limitation appears real. Yet history is filled with examples of people who moved beyond accepted boundaries. Scientists challenged existing theories. Inventors challenged conventional thinking. Explorers challenged perceived limits. Visionaries challenged assumptions about what could be achieved. In nearly every case, transformation began with the willingness to imagine something different. Imagination is one of the most powerful creative capacities human beings possess. Not because imagination replaces action, but because imagination expands the range of actions we consider possible. We cannot move toward a future we cannot imagine. Every achievement begins as a possibility held within awareness before it becomes visible in the world. This is why protecting our capacity for possibility is so important. Fear narrows possibility. Gladness expands it. Fear focuses on what might go wrong. Gladness remains available to what might go right. Both perspectives influence behavior. Both perspectives influence outcomes. Yet one creates contraction while the other creates expansion. The choice between them is rarely made once. It is made repeatedly, day after day, moment after moment, in conversations, in challenges, in opportunities, in quiet moments when no one else is watching. Each choice contributes to the emotional atmosphere we inhabit. Over time, that atmosphere becomes familiar. It becomes our default way of meeting life. And when gladness becomes part of that default state, something subtle but powerful begins happening. The future stops feeling like a destination we are desperately trying to reach. Instead, it starts feeling like a living process we are actively participating in. Every moment becomes an opportunity to align more deeply with the qualities we wish to express. Every experience becomes an invitation to refine awareness. Every challenge becomes a chance to strengthen coherence. And as this coherence deepens, we begin approaching a realization that may lie at the heart of the original manifestation code, a realization suggesting that the greatest transformation does not occur when reality finally matches our desires, but when our consciousness evolves enough to recognize the profound connection between the state we embody and the world we continuously help bring into being. And when that realization begins to settle into our daily experience, an entirely new way of relating to life starts to emerge. For many years, people have searched for techniques, formulas, and systems that promise transformation. They look for the perfect method, the perfect routine, the perfect strategy that will finally unlock the future they desire. Yet, the deeper I explore the relationship between consciousness and experience, the more I am reminded that transformation is rarely about discovering something we lack. More often, it is about remembering something we have forgotten. We have forgotten how deeply our inner world influences our perception. We have forgotten how profoundly emotions shape attention. We have forgotten that the quality of awareness we bring into each moment affects every decision that follows. And perhaps most importantly, we have forgotten that gladness is not merely an emotional reward waiting at the end of a journey. It can become a companion throughout the journey itself. This distinction is powerful. When gladness is postponed until a future outcome arrives, life becomes a constant negotiation. We tell ourselves we will feel fulfilled after the promotion, after the relationship, after the achievement, after the circumstances finally change. The problem is that the mind quickly adapts. One goal is reached and another appears. One milestone is achieved and a new horizon emerges. The pursuit continues. Meanwhile, the emotional state we hope to experience remains perpetually deferred. This pattern is common because the human mind naturally focuses on what is missing. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency helped our ancestors survive. Attention was drawn toward problems that required solving. Today, however, the same mechanism can create unintended consequences. Instead of noticing opportunities, we become preoccupied with deficiencies. Instead of recognizing progress, we focus exclusively on distance. Instead of appreciating what is present, we obsess over what is absent. Over time, this creates an emotional environment of perpetual incompleteness. No matter what is achieved, it never feels sufficient. No matter what is gained, attention quickly shifts elsewhere. Gladness interrupts this cycle. It redirects awareness toward what is already available in the present moment. Not because ambition is unimportant, not because growth should stop, but because appreciation and growth do not have to oppose one another. In fact, they may strengthen one another. A person who appreciates the present often approaches the future with greater clarity. A person who acknowledges existing strengths is more capable of building new ones. A person who recognizes current opportunities is more likely to discover additional opportunities. This creates an entirely different foundation for personal development. Growth is no longer driven solely by dissatisfaction. It becomes inspired by possibility. There is a profound difference between these two motivations. Dissatisfaction says, I must become something else before I can feel complete. Possibility says, I can continue growing while appreciating who I am becoming. One approach creates pressure. The other creates momentum. Pressure often leads to exhaustion. Momentum leads to sustainable transformation. When we understand this, gladness begins to reveal another layer of its significance. It is not simply a pleasant emotional state. It is a stabilizing force that helps maintain perspective during change. And change is constant. Every season of life introduces new challenges, new responsibilities, new uncertainties, new opportunities. Some changes arrive unexpectedly. Others arrive gradually, but regardless of how they appear, our ability to navigate them depends largely on the quality of awareness we bring into the experience. Consider two individuals facing the same uncertainty. One becomes overwhelmed by what might go wrong. The other remains open to what might be learned. Neither person knows exactly what will happen, yet their internal experiences differ dramatically. One experiences contraction. The other experiences expansion. One sees uncertainty as a threat. The other sees uncertainty as possibility. Again, the external circumstance may be identical. The emotional atmosphere is not. An emotional atmosphere influences everything. It influences perception. It influences resilience. It influences creativity. It influences the willingness to continue moving forward when outcomes remain unclear. This is why the practice of gladness becomes especially valuable during periods of transition. Anyone can feel optimistic when everything unfolds according to plan. The true test occurs when plans change, when expectations are disrupted, when familiar structures disappear. During these moments, our habitual patterns become visible. Do we automatically assume the worst? Do we withdraw from possibility? Do we become trapped in frustration? Or can we remain connected to appreciation even while navigating uncertainty? The answer to that question often determines whether a challenge becomes a source of growth or a source of stagnation. What fascinates me is that many of the individuals who demonstrate extraordinary resilience share a common quality. They maintain a relationship with meaning. Even when circumstances become difficult, they remain connected to something larger than immediate discomfort. They remember what matters. They remember what is valuable. They remember what remains possible. Gladness helps sustain that connection. It keeps awareness from becoming consumed by temporary conditions. It reminds us that life contains more dimensions than whatever challenge currently occupies our attention. This broader perspective changes how we interpret experience. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? We begin asking, what is this experience inviting me to understand? Instead of focusing solely on obstacles, we become curious about potential. Instead of resisting every unexpected turn, we explore what new directions might emerge. Curiosity is powerful because it keeps consciousness moving. Fear tends to freeze awareness. Curiosity expands it. Gladness often serves as the bridge between those two states. It creates enough openness for exploration to continue, enough trust for learning to occur, enough flexibility for adaptation to become possible. And adaptation is one of the defining characteristics of thriving systems. Nature adapts. Life adapts. Human beings adapt. The question is not whether adaptation will occur. The question is whether we will participate consciously in the process. The more conscious our participation becomes, the more clearly we begin seeing patterns that were previously hidden. We begin noticing how emotions influence choices, how choices influence experiences, how experiences reinforce beliefs, and how beliefs shape the reality we perceive. The cycle becomes visible. Once visible, it becomes workable. And as we continue working with that cycle intentionally, a remarkable realization starts emerging from beneath the surface of our everyday experience, a realization suggesting that gladness may not simply be one ingredient in the manifestation process, but one of the essential conditions that allows consciousness to access its fullest creative potential in the first place. And if that is true, then gladness deserves to be understood in a far deeper way than most of us have been taught. We often think of emotions as temporary reactions. They come and go, rising and falling with the circumstances of life. Yet some emotional states seem to carry a unique quality. They do more than influence how we feel in a given moment. They influence how we relate to life itself. Gladness is one of those states. It changes the lens through which experience is interpreted. It affects the stories we tell ourselves. It influences what we expect, what we notice, and what we believe is possible. The longer I reflect on this relationship, the more it seems that human beings are constantly living inside emotional environments of their own creation. Sometimes those environments are shaped by fear, sometimes by frustration, sometimes by hope, sometimes by appreciation. Whatever environment becomes dominant tends to influence the direction of our attention. And attention is one of the most valuable resources we possess. Where attention goes, energy follows. Where energy flows, patterns strengthen. What strengthens repeatedly begins shaping behavior. Behavior influences experience. Experience reinforces perception, and the cycle continues. This means that the emotional atmosphere we cultivate today is quietly contributing to the reality we experience tomorrow, not because emotions possess magical powers, but because they influence countless decisions, interpretations, and responses throughout daily life. Most of these influences occur beneath conscious awareness. A person who expects rejection may hesitate before speaking. A person who expects opportunity may initiate a conversation. One small choice creates one outcome. The other creates another. Over time, those choices accumulate. Lives are shaped. Destinies evolve. What fascinates me is how often these shifts begin with something seemingly simple, a change in perspective. A person starts seeing themselves differently. They stop identifying exclusively with old limitations. They become willing to imagine a future that does not resemble the past. That willingness opens a doorway. Not because everything changes instantly, but because possibility enters the conversation. Possibility is powerful. Without possibility, there is no motivation to grow. Without possibility, creativity remains dormant. Without possibility, transformation never begins. This is why emotional states that expand awareness are so important. They help preserve access to possibility. They keep the future from becoming trapped inside the assumptions of the past. Think about how often people unconsciously project yesterday into tomorrow. A disappointment occurs. The mind assumes it will happen again. A failure occurs. The mind assumes future failure. A painful experience leaves an impression. The impression becomes an expectation. Gradually, expectations solidify into beliefs. Beliefs begin filtering perception. The person no longer sees reality clearly. They see reality through accumulated assumptions. This process happens so naturally that it often goes unnoticed. Yet awareness changes everything. The moment we recognize the pattern, we gain the ability to interrupt it. We gain the ability to ask a different question. Instead of asking what happened before, we can ask what is possible now. That question carries tremendous power because it directs attention toward creation rather than repetition. It shifts focus away from limitation and toward opportunity. Gladness supports this shift because gladness naturally expands awareness. When we feel appreciative, inspired, or genuinely engaged with life, the mind becomes less defensive. The nervous system becomes less preoccupied with threat. Mental energy becomes available for exploration. Exploration leads to discovery. Discovery leads to growth. Growth leads to new experiences. Again, the cycle continues, but now it moves in a different direction. This is why I believe one of the greatest misconceptions about manifestation is the idea that it begins with external conditions. In many cases, it begins internally. It begins with the quality of awareness we bring into our lives. Two individuals may possess identical resources, identical opportunities, identical circumstances, yet their outcomes differ dramatically because their relationship with possibility differs. One remains closed, the other remains open. One sees barriers. The other sees pathways. One becomes consumed by limitation. The other becomes curious about solutions. That curiosity is not accidental. It emerges from an emotional atmosphere that supports exploration. And exploration is essential for growth. Every breakthrough in human history required someone willing to move beyond existing assumptions. Every innovation required someone willing to imagine something different. Every meaningful transformation required someone willing to see possibility where others saw impossibility. The same principle applies within our personal lives. Transformation often begins the moment we stop treating current circumstances as permanent definitions. Life is constantly changing. The person we are today is not the person we were 10 years ago. The person we will become 10 years from now is still unfolding. Yet many people cling to outdated identities. They define themselves by old experiences, old failures, old fears, old stories. The stories become familiar. Familiarity becomes comfort, even when the story no longer serves growth. Gladness helps loosen the grip of those stories. It reminds us that life contains more possibilities than the narratives we inherited, more possibilities than the mistakes we made, more possibilities than the limitations we accepted. And once we begin recognizing those possibilities, something extraordinary starts happening. The future becomes less predictable in the best possible way. Instead of repeating old emotional patterns automatically, we become capable of creating new ones. Instead of reacting unconsciously, we begin responding intentionally. Instead of living exclusively from memory, we start living from awareness. This shift may be one of the most important developments in human consciousness because awareness creates freedom. Freedom creates choice. Choice creates new pathways. And new pathways create new realities. The process is gradual, often subtle, yet profoundly transformative. Each moment of appreciation strengthens a different pattern. Each moment of conscious presence strengthens a different pattern. Each moment of gladness strengthens a different pattern. Over time, these patterns accumulate. The atmosphere changes. Perception changes. Behavior changes. Experience changes. Life begins reflecting a different relationship with possibility. And as that relationship deepens, another question naturally begins to emerge, one that moves beyond the idea of manifesting specific outcomes and toward a deeper exploration of what human consciousness may actually be capable of when it becomes fully aligned with the qualities of openness, coherence, appreciation, and the enduring state of gladness that has quietly accompanied humanity's greatest transformations throughout history. And as that question deepens, we begin to notice something subtle but undeniable about the nature of attention itself. Attention is not passive. It is directional. It selects. It amplifies. It gives form to experience by deciding what enters awareness and what remains in the background. Most people assume they are simply observing life as it happens, but in truth, they are constantly participating in a process of selection that shapes their entire reality. Out of countless stimuli, the mind filters a fraction into conscious experience. And what gets filtered is influenced by emotional state. When fear is dominant, attention narrows. It becomes highly focused on threat, risk, and potential loss. When gladness is present, attention expands. It becomes more receptive to nuance, possibility, and connection. This difference may seem small at first, but it has profound consequences over time. A narrowed field of attention tends to reinforce familiar patterns. An expanded field of attention allows new patterns to emerge. This is one reason why moments of genuine gladness often feel like moments of clarity. It is not just that we feel better, it is that we see differently. We notice things we previously overlooked. We interpret situations with greater flexibility. We become aware of options that were always present but previously invisible. This suggests that gladness is not simply an emotional experience layered onto perception. It is part of the mechanism that shapes perception itself. And if perception is shaped by emotional state, then emotional state becomes a foundational element in how reality is experienced. This leads to an important realization. We are not simply reacting to reality. We are interacting with it through a constantly shifting internal lens. That lens is influenced by belief. It is influenced by memory. It is influenced by expectation. And it is deeply influenced by emotion. Over time, these influences create a kind of habitual worldview, a stable pattern through which life is interpreted. Some worldviews are expansive. They assume possibility is abundant. They assume growth is natural. They assume challenges can be understood and transformed. Other worldviews are constricted. They assume limitation is the norm. They assume change is risky. They assume difficulty is permanent. Neither worldview is fixed at birth. Both are shaped through experience, repetition, and interpretation, and both can evolve. This is where awareness becomes essential, because without awareness, we simply continue reinforcing existing patterns. We interpret new experiences through old assumptions. We see the present through the lens of the past. But with awareness, something different becomes possible. We begin noticing the pattern itself. We begin observing how thoughts arise, how emotions influence those thoughts, how those thoughts influence perception, and how perception influences behavior. This observation creates space. And within that space, choice becomes possible. Not every thought must be followed. Not every emotion must define action. Not every interpretation must become belief. This is a profound shift in human experience because it introduces flexibility into a system that often feels automatic. And flexibility is the foundation of adaptation. Now, when we bring gladness into this discussion, its role becomes even more interesting. Gladness does not force change. It does not demand transformation. Instead, it softens rigidity. It creates openness. It reduces internal resistance. In that sense, gladness is less like a command and more like an environment in which new possibilities can emerge more easily. Think about how different environments influence growth in nature. Certain conditions support expansion. Others restrict it. Some environments encourage diversity. Others limit it. Human consciousness appears to respond in a similar way. The emotional environment we cultivate influences what becomes possible within our experience. This does not mean we can control every outcome. Life will always include unpredictability, but it does suggest that we play a meaningful role in shaping how we respond to that unpredictability. And response is where transformation often begins. Not in controlling events, but in evolving the way we meet them. When gladness is present, even challenges can be approached with a sense of curiosity rather than collapse. This does not remove difficulty. It changes its context. A difficulty encountered in a state of contraction feels overwhelming. The same difficulty encountered in a state of openness feels navigable. The situation may be identical. The internal experience is not. Over time, these differences accumulate. They influence decisions. They influence relationships. They influence opportunities we are willing to pursue, and they influence the trajectory of personal growth. This is why emotional awareness becomes such a crucial aspect of conscious living. Without it, we remain at the mercy of habitual reactions. With it, we gain the ability to participate more intentionally in our own development. And as this awareness deepens, something else begins to surface. A recognition that the boundary between internal experience and external reality may not be as fixed as it first appears. Instead, there seems to be a continuous exchange between perception and experience, between what we feel and what we encounter, between how we interpret and how we respond. And within that exchange, consciousness plays an active role, not as a passive observer, but as an engaged participant. This perspective does not diminish the importance of the external world. Rather, it highlights the importance of how we engage with it. Because engagement is where meaning is formed, and meaning influences everything that follows. When we begin to understand this, gladness takes on an even deeper significance. It is no longer just a desirable emotional state. It becomes a way of engaging with reality that keeps perception flexible, responsive, and open to possibility. It becomes a way of maintaining connection to life even when circumstances are uncertain. And perhaps most importantly, it becomes a reminder that transformation is not something that happens to us, but something that unfolds through us as we continue to evolve the way we participate in the ongoing relationship between consciousness, emotion, and the ever-changing experience of being alive, a relationship that now appears to extend further than simple observation, suggesting instead that we are continuously co-creating the field of our experience through the subtle but powerful influence of attention, belief, and the quiet, steady presence of gladness itself.
When we step back from the narrative of gladness as manifestation and look at it through a scientific and psychological lens, something very grounded begins to appear beneath the poetic language. We are essentially talking about how the human brain builds reality through attention, prediction, and emotional regulation. Let me explain this in a simple way. Your brain is not a passive recording device. It is more like a prediction engine. Every second, it is trying to guess what is happening next based on past experience. It fills in gaps, filters information, and constructs your perception of reality before you are even consciously aware of it. This is why two people can live through the same event and experience it differently. The event is not changing, the internal prediction system is. Now, here is where emotion becomes extremely important. Emotion is not just a feeling layered on top of experience. It is a biological signal that tells your brain what matters. When you feel fear, your brain increases attention to threat-related information. When you feel calm or gladness, your brain expands attention and begins noticing patterns it would normally ignore. A simple example is walking into a crowded room. If you are anxious, your brain highlights judgment, danger, and social risk. If you are in a state of openness or gladness, you notice facial expressions, opportunities for connection, and subtle details in the environment. The room has not changed. your filtering system has. Neuroscience often refers to this as attentional bias. Your emotional state influences what your brain selects from the overwhelming amount of sensory input available at any moment. This connects directly to the idea of creating your reality, but not in a mystical sense. It is about perception shaping action. Let's go deeper. Once your brain selects information, it influences your interpretation. Interpretation leads to decision making. Decision making leads to behavior. Behavior leads to outcomes, and those outcomes reinforce your future expectations. This is a loop, and most people are living inside this loop without realizing it. If someone repeatedly expects failure, their brain begins scanning for evidence of failure. They hesitate more, they avoid risks, they interpret neutral events negatively. Over time, their life reflects those patterns, not because reality is fixed, but because their internal filtering system is reinforcing itself. Now consider gladness. Gladness is not denial of difficulty. It is a state of nervous system openness. In physiological terms, it often correlates with reduced stress hormones and increased parasympathetic activity, which supports creativity, social connection, and flexible thinking. When the body feels safe, the brain spends less energy on survival and more energy on exploration. This is crucial because exploration is where new possibilities are found. One of the most practical ways to understand this is through the concept of neuroplasticity. Your brain physically changes based on what you repeatedly think, feel, and do. Neural pathways that are used frequently become stronger. Pathways that are not used weaken over time. So if your dominant emotional state is stress or frustration, your brain becomes efficient at stress. If your dominant emotional state includes appreciation or gladness, your brain becomes efficient at noticing positive patterns, opportunities, and solutions. This does not mean life becomes perfect. It means your interpretation of life becomes more adaptive. Now let's connect this to everyday experience. Have you ever noticed that when you are in a good mood, problems feel smaller? You are more likely to find solutions, talk to people, or try something new. But when you are in a low emotional state, the same problems feel heavier, and even simple tasks feel overwhelming. This is not imagination. This is cognitive flexibility changing with emotional state. Another important mechanism involved here is what psychologists call the reticular activating system. This is a network in the brain that acts like a filter for attention. It decides what information is relevant based on your current priorities and emotional signals. If your mind is focused on danger, you will notice danger everywhere. If your mind is focused on gratitude or gladness, you will begin noticing supportive people, helpful moments, and small opportunities that were always present but previously ignored. So the question becomes not how do I force reality to change, but rather what am I training my attention to notice? Now let's move into the deeper meaning behind these ideas. At a human level, many people experience life as something happening to them. But when we understand attention, emotion, and prediction, we begin to see that we are also participants in shaping how life is experienced, moment by moment. This does not remove external reality, it changes our relationship with it. We stop seeing ourselves as powerless observers and begin recognizing that our internal state plays a continuous role in how reality is constructed in perception and action. So, how do we apply this in real life in a practical way? First, you begin with emotional awareness. Several times a day, pause and simply ask, what is my current emotional state doing to my perception right now? This builds the ability to observe instead of automatically react. Second, practice what can be called micro gladness. This is not forced positivity, it is intentional recognition of something small that feels stable or meaningful. It could be breath, light, silence, or a simple moment of ease. The goal is to train your nervous system to notice safety and possibility. Third, use attention redirection. When you notice spiraling thoughts or negative prediction loops, gently shift focus to something present and neutral in your environment. This interrupts the automatic loop and creates mental space. Fourth, support your biology. Sleep, movement, and breathing patterns strongly influence emotional regulation. Slow breathing in particular signals safety to the nervous system, which naturally increases openness and reduces reactive thinking. Finally, remember that consistency matters more than intensity. You are not trying to force a permanent emotional state. You are training a pattern of awareness that gradually becomes more natural over time. The deeper truth behind all of this is simple but powerful. Your experience of life is not only determined by what happens to you, but also by how your nervous system interprets what happens. And that interpretation is trainable. Gladness, in this sense, is not just an emotion, it becomes a practice of perception, a way of relating to experience that keeps awareness flexible, open, and capable of seeing more than fear alone allows. When practiced consistently, it does not remove challenge from life. Instead, it changes your capacity to meet challenge with clarity instead of contraction, with awareness instead of automatic reaction, and with possibility instead of limitation. And in that shift, something very subtle begins to change in how life unfolds through you.